if you don't continually debate about things that you haven't done well. And I think what you've seen with Chavez is a real rejection of any of that sort of criticism, and that, you know, as the years continue, will become really problematic. I don't. How much time? Catch a bus. Okay. So if anyone has a couple more questions, or you can also email me through the website. I can answer any questions you might have down the line through that as well. Sure.
So I was just wondering, in what way do you see Chavez's leadership really going? You mentioned the filmmakers, Leninist.
That is what, sorry?
You almost seem a bit Leninist, and I was just wondering if you agreed about what direction you think it would take.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with this vote on December 2nd. I think that's where, the conversation has to start. I think it's very problematic. I think we left Venezuela in December really optimistic, and I think it shows that in the film. And I think a lot of people who found themselves in the middle, felt very optimistic. And even though Chavez had alluded to a lot of the things, that he intended to, thought about doing or saw as part of his process forward, he hadn't done them, and people really didn't necessarily think that he was going to follow through with them, at least so quickly after being reelected. So, I think, again, there's a lot of elements to the constitutional amendment that, most people believe are going to be passed that could present real issues to the Venezuelan people down the line. And in terms of, someday there will be a handover of power. It's inevitable, right? And people have asked that question: when that day comes, how do you avert some sort of major civil war or national conflict? And it has to be done through free and fair elections with an incredible amount of international presence, not only from the Carter Center, but from the EU, the Nordic bloc, all these different observation groups. And that's the only way that the opposition will be able to take power or regain some elements of power without there being a major conflict. Because the reports coming out of Venezuela right now are that everyone's arming themselves, and it's not one side, and it's not just one side and not the other, but everyone is. And I'm not sure at what point that sort of explodes. And it's really, anytime you do a project and spend 10 months of your life on one team, you become very much involved with the people there, not just in a work environment, but also emotionally. And so it's really hard for me right now to get all these, stories coming out of Venezuela, because now you have that friend, family element to it as well. So I'm really concerned and lamenting the fact that the film, hasn't had as much coverage in Venezuela in the months leading up to this December 2nd vote as it probably should have had or could have had an impact on.
Does Chavez have any personal relationship with the oil industry in any way?
I mean, in the sense that, in the sense of family.
Well, specifically with Citgo or I think I've heard somewhere.
I mean, in the sense that it's nationalized, he has a very direct relationship with it, and that's something that's misunderstood. Chavez didn't nationalize oil; it was nationalized in 1976. But what Chavez has done is revisited a lot of the agreements with the oil companies and negotiated for greater percentages to come back to the Venezuelan government. But in terms of direct personal relationships, aside from obviously appointing an energy minister and things like that, I don't know of any family relationships or anything like that. But it's a very direct relationship between the oil and the oil revenue with the executive branch. That's very clear. Yeah. Is that 5 minutes or is that a question?
It's a question,
okay.
Actually. Obviously, Chavez is tapping into quite a big constituency on a number of the issues that he's made most prominent. How long do you think Chavez, as a politician, has as a shelf life? How long do you think it will be where people start to become disillusioned if they don't see genuine change with their own eyes?
Well, I mean, I think what you saw in the film is there are people who are disillusioned, but there's also people who have benefited from the government in some way or other. You know, when Chavez took power in '98, oil was at $8 a barrel, and now it's almost 100. So, you know, there's a lot of money in Venezuela, and a lot of it has gotten back to the people. That's, you know, those who deny that, you know, are, again, shooting themselves in the foot. They're not recognizing the fact that there is some resources getting back to the people. But if Chavez hopes to alleviate poverty by 2020, which is what he always says in his speeches, you know, he's got to revisit those plans for distribution of resources, because there's a significant block of people that, you know, have yet to receive the benefits that they need to receive. And so, you know, people are disillusioned, and they're going to continue to be disillusioned unless, you know, again, going back to the talk about Venezuela being in an experimental stage, unless they start to revisit and question, you know, elements of that experiment that haven't gone well thus far. And what you see, especially with the amendment and with Chavez's discourse himself, is there's not enough of that reflection going on. So the question then becomes, you know, it's a question down the line, but who becomes a leader then? And that's also an issue. You know, there's very few people coming out of Chavismo as well as out of the opposition that can really handle the national stage, and so that'll be something to address down the line as well. Sure, this will probably have to be the last one, but yeah.
Is the support, like, because in the beginning of the film you were talking about how there's, you know, the 40% to 60%, like, at least in Caracas. So in terms of Venezuela in general, is it more that the upper class are more argumentative and have more problems with Chavez's policies, and it's that Chavez has been able to integrate himself with the lower classes, or is it not really like that and he has support from both?
I mean, I think in '98 it was easier to characterize it like that, because you had, you know, that 60% block that had not benefited from the 40 years under the two-party system. And so when someone comes to power saying, you know, we need to revisit this plan, we need to figure out how to better represent everyone, you know, that rings true with those people. And then you had 40% that had immense resources, and they didn't necessarily want to redistribute those amongst their peers. And so you have them, you know, generally being opposed to that plan. But in 2006, it's more complicated. I mean, I think, you know, you have, again, that immense rise in oil prices, and you have a lot of people on both sides of the aisle making a lot of money and getting a lot of contracts. And so that has complicated the relationship between socioeconomic standing and being a supporter or a dissident of Chavez. And so it's not as true now as it was, you know, maybe 8 years ago.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming on.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It was a really rubbish day, and thank Chris for screening a great movie as well. Our next meeting has actually been cancelled, so our next meeting is going to be Rodri Morgan on the 7th of December. You'll get emails about this in the next couple of weeks, and until then, thanks everyone for coming. Thanks for Chris again.